Welcome to Season 1, Episode 4 of Pockets of Joy with Niamh O'Connell, dropping 2 episodes a week to inspire you to live your dream life. Today my guest is writer Ben Murnane in Canada. He's just published a biography of Zoltan Istvan, the American presidential candidate who believes technology will soon help us live forever. Let's dive into this pocket of joy and learn about transhumanism. Will AI take over? Ayn Rand and the quest for immortality? Zoltan's incredible life story, and how Ben navigates the writer's life. Check my YouTube channel for the video version with bloopers. Today at Pockets of Joy, I am joined by my wonderfully talented cousin, Ben Murnane. Will we add the nepotism bit in there?
Sure, why not? Better to be open about it and upfront, I reckon.
Ben has been an extremely talented writer. Are you turning 40 this year, or have you turned 40?
Yep, don't remind me, but yeah.
Okay. I have known Ben. I'm 6 years older. I've known Ben since he was a bump. And Ben has been the most gifted and talented writer. One of the most gifted. I can't exclude my husband, who's also a writer. But Ben has had a real talent for words and communication and writing. And it has been a passion of his literally since he could hold a pen. I remember, Ben, you used to publish your own magazine. You did it all through school.
Yep.
You've now made it into a career. You were literally living the dream, I think, as you probably had as a child. You wanted to be a writer, I could imagine. So you're here to promote your new book. And I would love to talk to you about the writer's lifestyle as well, and how you manage that as a career full time, which is amazing, and how you've built it up. If you can give us a little background or whatever you want to do, go for it.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me on, Niamh, and it's a real pleasure to be on your podcast, and best of luck with it. I'm super excited to listen in and hear how it turns out. So thanks again for having me.
Thank you.
But yeah, no, it's been a long journey, I guess, as a writer. What would I say about the journey in terms of, I guess, you mentioned being very talented and all the rest of it. And as you know yourself, that doesn't necessarily get you anywhere without the hard work and the luck and all the other aspects that go with getting somewhere in life. Writing was a real outlet for me growing up because, I grew up with a very rare illness called Fanconi anemia. Only a couple of other families in Ireland who are affected by the disease. And so I spent a lot of time in and out of hospital as a kid, and I had a bone marrow transplant when I was 16 and spent lots of years on steroids, and that affected me in a whole other way. But writing was really an outlet. It was an escape. I was always an introverted type of person, I guess. And, I didn't really find joy or comfort in the company of other people. I found it instead in, the blank page and sharing my thoughts and feelings with the blank page. And that grew, as you say. Then I wanted to try and find an audience or share those ideas, and I guess try and share who I was with other people in my life. And the way that I thought about doing that was mostly through writing. So I started my own little magazine among my peer group in primary school and actually went all the way through college and kind of grew and grew every year, got a bit of an audience. So that was how it started. I always had been writing. I didn't think that I would necessarily make a career out of it. I thought about doing other things. I thought about becoming an actor. I thought about becoming a lawyer at one point, studied law for about 4 days until I realized that it was probably a way of thinking that didn't suit my own mindset, which was maybe just more creative and not used to kind of thinking in the kind of boxes of the professional world, if you like. Nothing wrong with that at all. It just wasn't the way my mind was working, at least at the time. And yeah, so I thought about being an actor, but being an introvert and not necessarily being the best person at putting himself out there, and also the challenges of the industry, better than anyone. So I studied acting in college, studied drama in college, but I was always writing all along. And so my first job out of college was working with the company in Dublin called Be Creative Media. And they worked with the independent group, INM, Ireland's largest newspaper group, now Media House. And so I was writing for the Irish Independent and the Sunday Independent and the Evening Herald, right out of college, which was a fantastic job for a young person, 24 years of age, and you're reviewing restaurants and going on press trips. And it was just the best thing in the world.
Oh, that's living the dream.
Just got, it was just luck. And I was very, very lucky to be able to do that and learned so much. Kevin Flanagan, who was the boss of Be Creative Media, still is, took me under his wing, and I was his ghostwriter and went on press trips with him and learned about wine writing and travel. And around the same time, my first book was published, and that was about the illness, 2 in a Million. And then that led to another book, which was on travel, tour guide, kind of tour guide for Dublin. And so then I kept doing travel writing, and one thing leads to another, and I ended up getting a job with a company called International Living, which is based in Waterford. And I've been working for them on and off and in different roles, but now for about 7 years. That it's mostly travel, but it's also finance and kind of global economic news and things like that. That's the kind of the side of things that I focus on now. But all along, I've kept writing books. I did a PhD somewhere in there, and that was published. So I guess it's just been a case of one thing leading to another. I've been very lucky. I've worked hard. COVID, I'm sure we'll probably talk a little bit more about this, but that was a real game changer for me in terms of when we suddenly were running International Living magazine from home, and everybody realized we didn't necessarily need to be in the office. I realized that I didn't need to live, 20 minutes from the office. I could be anywhere in the world. And, now today I'm in Canada. So that was very...
Canadian Sandra, we must mention her. I'm sure she's a great support to you as well.
Yes, it's not random that I'm in Canada, right? But we had kind of decided that we were going to maybe travel a little bit, and Canada obviously was the logical place to move to and experience a different adventure maybe than being in Ireland. But it was really COVID and the lockdowns and the experience of remote work and working from home that changed my mindset and changed, I guess, the mindset of the world and the company and a lot of people, right? But that has been the biggest thing in the last few years that has opened up, I suppose, more opportunities for me and more possibilities in terms of my work life, where I can do it from, what it entails, what hours it happens during, and all of that. And for a writer, it's really perfect,
It's brilliant. Are you a night owl or a morning person? I'm definitely a night owl myself.
Yeah, I would naturally be a night owl, but I'm not totally freelance. I'm a contractor, but I work for one company mostly, in addition to doing my own work and books and so on. So I broadly have to work to the office hours in Ireland, which is a little bit of a challenge. Here in Canada, you have to be
behind, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. Here on the East Coast. Yeah. So I just have to be online for basically the afternoon Ireland time to make sure there's some overlap for us doing all the things we need to do. So I'd naturally be a night owl, but now I'm in bed by 10 o'clock every night and up at 7. So
that's also what it's like hitting your 40s, Ben. I'm sorry to say it. Earlier, even if we're still working from bed, we're still in bed. And come here, how do you structure your work day then? If you're kind of, semi on and semi off with other people, are you able to kind of take a break midday and go live your life? Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice like that. So in that case, there is some flexibility. So I tend to work, yes, from bed for the first couple of hours of the day. If anyone at International Living is listening to this, just ignore that. So I do tend to, work a couple of hours in the morning first thing. and then get up, have breakfast. And then when the office closes in Ireland, I have a little bit more flexibility, so I can take a leisurely lunch. I usually go for a walk in the middle of the day. And then I work kind of later into the evening. I would usually work most of the day and only take an hour or two off before bed with dinner in there somewhere. Work, talking about pockets of joy, work, I would say, whether for good or ill, is my main motivation in life and always has been, whether it's my own work or employment in some capacity or other. So that's where I do find pleasure. I like to be productive. I get very antsy if I'm not producing things all the time. That's just me.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's the case for most creatives. And I think you're really lucky that you've been able to find employment doing what you love, because a lot of creatives might still only be able to pursue their passion as a hobby, but they might have to have another day job or a part-time job that pays the bills. So it's brilliant you've been able to find both. So as well as being employed by international media, you're also writing books, aren't you?
That's right. Yep. So I have a new book, as you mentioned, coming out very shortly. It is, I guess, an extension of my PhD topic. So to talk a little bit about the books, the first book that I published in 2008 was 2 in a Million, obviously on the illness journey. And because I grew up with such a rare disease and I guess spent a lot of time in and out of hospital, as I mentioned, but being reliant on modern technology, I guess you could say, and on medical innovation for really being alive. The the life expectancy with Fanconi anemia is a lot better now than it was even when I was growing up. But it was 22 back in the 1990s, and then it was 33, and a lot of people who are young still die very, very young, too young, from the illness. And so I was fascinated with life expectancy, with technology, with the idea that all of our lives are being lengthened because of modern medical innovations. Life expectancy has doubled in the last 100 years. And a lot of that is down to, infant mortality improving and so on. But again, that's due largely to medical innovation. So I was interested in that because of the illness, and that became part of what I studied as a PhD. I studied technology, and in particular the influence of one fiction writer on the technology sector. As a humanities person, I was interested in, how does fiction impact real life? How are people, who read books, how do they then go out and change the world in some way? And what's the connection between what they read and what they did? So I was interested in that. So that's what the PhD was on. And through that, I met the guy who
I have to pause you there. So tell us about your PhD, because I went deep diving into your career today, what I could find online. And I read the intro to your, I think it was your PhD that's been published on Kindle, has it? Ayn Rand,
yeah.
Human. Yeah. So can you just tell us briefly about Ayn Rand? Because it's wonderful to hear about a woman whose work was taken so seriously in her time.
Yeah, for sure. Ayn Rand
Ayn Rand.
is a very popular author in the States. She's a very divisive figure because she was an advocate really for right-wing politics, for capitalism, essentially. She came from the Soviet Union, and she migrated to America and really had a very negative reaction to communism and socialism. And so she became an advocate of free markets and individualism. And she wrote two bestsellers in the mid 20th century, one called The Fountainhead and the second one, Atlas Shrugged. And The Fountainhead is really a portrayal of an artist, a creative called Howard Rourke, who will do anything to realize his vision as he envisions it, I guess, even going so far as in the book, this is a spoiler alert, but he blows up his own building for a public housing project that he's designed because the authorities have changed his original design. So it's kind of this very extreme defense of artistic integrity. And the Fountainhead expands this into a defense of capitalism as a creative arena where people invent new things and start businesses and do all these things that are very creative, even though we don't necessarily think of capitalism as being creative or a creative arena, right? So she ended up obviously being a divisive figure because she obviously was embedded in the conservative kind of right-wing movement in the States. But she had a huge impact, and there's no denying that. A number of officials in the Reagan administration in particular would have cited her as an influence in their economic views. And she had a huge impact on Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, very well-known ones, you know, like Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak and Jimmy Wales, who started Wikipedia, Peter Thiel. They've all, at one point or another, cited the Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged as being an inspiration for what they did. And so that was fascinating to me, this idea of a fiction writer having such an impact on the real world and people who start companies.
Mm-hmm.
But politically, she can be, as I say, a divisive figure. But that was what the PhD was on. It was on her influence on Silicon Valley and this new emerging field called transhumanism, which is essentially the idea that through technology, humans are becoming a different species, or we could become a different species. You know, once you have an iPhone, it's almost like a third arm. So, you know, like we feel very deprived if we don't have access to our iPhone all the time. And it's an essential tool for modern life, right? So to what extent then are our identities and our views of ourselves impacted by our relationship with technology? And to what extent does that mean that we might actually be becoming not what humans were 10,000 years ago, right? And the transhumanists would view that as a good thing. They're advocates of technology and technological change, and the idea, I guess, that through modern innovation, we might live an awful lot longer. We might travel to the stars. We might colonize other planets. They view all these things as good things, right? Because it means we're doing more. There's more possibilities. So, yeah.
Sorry, can I interrupt you there? Because as a writer, where do you stand on the whole chat GPT thing coming in and taking over, say, the career of a writer? You know, I could ask chat GPT to write blog posts for me, and I could never write a blog post again in my life. But then it puts people like you out of business. And my son, who's an aspiring writer, has begged me never to use chat GPT. And I've gone in and tested it out to see what can it do. But I'm kind of opposed to it as well, because I think if we start outsourcing that, where does it end? And then what can we trust when we're reading online? What's actually had a human behind it, you know? Where do you stand on all that?
Well, I mean, just to, I suppose, finish the thought, which really leads into your question, my book, which is coming out soon, is on one particular transhumanist technology advocate called Zoltan Istvan. He's a Californian who has run for president, and he's advocated really for incorporating technology into our lives more and more, including things like ChatGPT. And he is, as I say, a big proponent of new technologies, but also someone who is warning us about things that you've just mentioned, you know, that human jobs will be disappearing. AI, new technologies, robots will be doing things that, you know, humans are doing right now, and we'll all be out of jobs. I don't know how much that is going to be the case. I think AI is obviously a challenge, but also an opportunity. If you look at the history of technology, every new technology has created more jobs than it's, you know, destroyed. But it is the case that new technologies do destroy industries or change them. But I don't think that we can, you know, ban them or hold things back. You know, I think that, you know, I'm sure people advocated for not introducing electricity into homes because it was going to put candle makers out of business. Uh, but, you know, I think overall we benefit from new things, even though they may change how we have to operate. And yes, ChatGPT generative AI certainly falls into that category. The way I think of it is as a tool, and if you use it properly, it doesn't erase the need for the human element. In fact, it only increases the need for humans to be more discerning and creative and to think even more kind of galaxy brained about the value that we can add to creative industries.
And sorry,
So
can I ask one question so I understand how ChatGPT works? Because I haven't even read into it much. And by the way, I do love my Alexa. I have an Alexa in the kitchen, and I've outsourced all my working memory to that in the last few years. With perimenopausal hormones, I have zero working memory. So I'll forget I've left food in the oven or on the frying pan. I'll walk away and I'll smell burning unless I tell Alexa to remind me in 3 minutes to come back and check, you know? So I'm really happy with certain parts of AI, and I love being able to use that day to day. But does ChatGPT, if I asked it, let's say, generate me a blog post on 10 tips for summer wellness, right? Does it just plumb the existing internet for all the human written articles, and does it just take a mishmash of that? So if in essence we were to just use that, we would only be rehashing the same old info. Is that right?
That's basically how it works. Yeah. It just takes what's out there and synthesizes it. And, but, that's how humans operate too, right? To a large degree. I kind of think, like when I did my PhD, I just read what was in the library and kind of tried to add to it in some way. But I think the risk is when you think you don't have to do anything with, whatever a tool like ChatGPT produces, you can't necessarily trust it, right? It might be drawing from websites that are not presenting the most accurate information, especially the free version, which is a couple of years old in terms of the websites it draws on. So, it's like when Wikipedia first came out, people said, don't cite Wikipedia. Anybody can be going in there and changing things. So I think we always have to be discerning. We always have to add our own value judgment to new technologies.
Yeah, totally. So Ben, can you tell us, how does Zoltan come into all of this?
Yeah, well, it's so interesting because he's such an interesting character, and obviously that's why I made him the subject of the book that's coming out soon. He is a real proponent of everything we've been talking about, of ChatGPT, of new technologies of every stripe and kind. So, yeah, the book is coming out in a few weeks. I came into contact with Zoltan through my PhD. He actually was someone who, again, was very inspired by Ayn Rand. Very, I guess, he wanted to, if you like, do a new version of Ayn Rand, be a new version of Ayn Rand for the 21st century. And so he based his book, his self-published book, which came out in 2013, called The Transhumanist Wager. He based that essentially on Rand's two successful novels that we've talked about, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. And he sort of combined them, if you like, into how he created his plot, and he added to it with this whole new technological context. So in the same way as we talked about, Rand thought of capitalism as a creative arena where people start businesses and make new inventions and have all these ideas that they can put into practice in the real world, if you like. Zoltan took that the next step further, and you can be more creative than you ever imagined. You can chop off your arm and replace it with a robot arm because you can do more things with the robot arm, or you can take out your eyes and replace them with bionic eyes because he wants to see more parts of the spectrum than you can see with your eyes as they are biologically. So he brought all these ideas together into his book, The Transhumanist Wager. He self-published that, as I say, in 2013. It kind of took off from there. He got invited to write for a lot of different sites. Eventually, he worked his way into the mainstream, if you like. He had such an interesting life before that. He's not someone who came to these ideas just because he read them in a book, if you like. He traveled the world in his 20s for 7 years on a sailboat, visited over 100 countries, worked for National Geographic in war zones. He spent time in Kashmir. he came home and started a business, and he actually made his fortune in a span of 3 years by flipping houses. And he would kind of flip them low, if you like, buy them for 100,000 and flip them and sell them on for double or triple the price. And he made enough money in 3 years doing that, essentially to never work again. And he then devoted his life to this idea of transhumanism, this idea that he wanted to live forever through technology and expand his life in all these ways that, you know, most of us will never think of, as I mentioned, like things like having robot bodies and robot body parts. So he's just a really, really interesting guy. And he is a big advocate for technology, for things like ChatGPT. But he would say we need to think about how we incorporate these things into our life, and think about how we live our lives as a consequence of these technologies being available. Because, well, the way he sees it, human jobs may not be around in a few years because of things like ChatGPT, because of robots. And, more and more human jobs will be doable by robots and by technology. But I think you have to also think about them as tools. This would be my view, that, ChatGPT can be very useful to me in my job because it can help me to understand maybe aspects of things that I haven't thought about before. And it can help me to think about writing about different regions. I write about different parts of the world, and ChatGPT can help you create some colorful language around a particular area. But you always have to know that you have to bring your own judgment to that. Those things can be wrong.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Yeah, so Zoltan fits into this technological moment, I would say, in quite a big way. And in terms of how we go from here, it is a very interesting moment in history.
Wow. And your new book that's launching this month actually is about his biography. Isn't that right? You're writing his biography? You have
Yeah,
written his biography, I should say. How did that come about? You
yeah.
found, and he loved your work, was it?
Well, it was something like that. He, because he has written his book, which was inspired by Ayn Rand, I ended up writing a chapter on him in my PhD, and that went into the book that was based on my PhD. So we came into contact with each other through that, and he ended up suggesting that we maybe work on something together, and that ended up, as you say, becoming me writing his biography, essentially. And like I say, he's just had such an interesting life, so it was a lot of fun to writing about him visiting all these countries, writing about him starting his business, and then all the crazy, wacky ideas he's tried to put out there in the public since then. He's run for president twice. He ran in 2016 and 2020, and he ran for California governor in 2018. In 2016, he drove around America in a bus shaped like a coffin,
Oh my
with this idea that, without transhumanism, without new technology, we'll all be in the grave soon enough. And so he was really promoting his campaign and his ideas through the idea that, it's it's a choice essentially between his campaign and death. So it was kind
God.
of an extreme view in this extreme campaign.
He's really committed to it. And you were telling me before he does volcano surfing or something?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So when he was working for National Geographic, he pioneered the sport of volcano boarding, which is surfing down a volcano as it's erupting. So he was on a snowboard just going down a volcano, and there's footage of him online. You can still check it out on YouTube of him going down a volcano on a surfboard. So
Oh
he's
my God.
lived on the edge, and you could almost say he might appear from time to time to have a death wish. For a guy who wants to live very long and maybe wants to live forever, he
Yeah.
has put himself in these very dangerous situations. But I guess it's that idea, right, that if you're not living on the edge, if you're not getting that adrenaline rush, are you really living?
it's one way to live for sure. It wouldn't float my boat. I have quite a small, contained life that feels safe and I'm comfortable, and my nervous system needs that to keep regulated. And I felt that even more so in the last few years with COVID, with perimenopause, hormonal changes, and also being diagnosed neurodivergent or discovering my neurodivergency. Or my neurodivergence, I should say. So for me, I need a very predictable life. Now, I still like spontaneity because I have ADHD. So I don't want to have everything prescribed for me, but I do like to know where I'll be sleeping tonight and where my next meal will be and what I'll be eating. And I can kind of go awry in between those things, but I need certain parameters. Whereas he sounds like the opposite end of the spectrum, but I suppose his kind of brain is going to come up with these amazing creative sparks of genius, which the rest of us think he's mad probably because it's so new and novel. Yet I'm sure that's how Da Vinci was thought of in his time, and Einstein in his time, and all the pioneers of any kind of advances, right?
I'm sure there's a certain level of truth in that. He would be delighted to hear you comparing him to Einstein and Da Vinci and all these figures. But I think, I would be more of your mindset for sure. I live quite a predictable life. I like to have a routine. I don't really like social contexts. I'm a big time introvert, as we talked about earlier. So that's kind of one of the fun things about the book. I guess it's a little bit about this friendship, this relationship between me, who's very much, the person I am, and him, very much the opposite kind of person, and how we play off each other a little bit. And I guess things that I maybe learned from him, and I wouldn't go so far as to say he learned anything from me, but there's definitely an interplay between our different mindsets, and that comes into the book for sure.
That's really interesting. I'm dying to read it. And let's just look into his psychology a little bit, because I was doing a bit of research in preparation for this interview, and I see that he is like first generation American from Hungarian immigrant parents in what, the 50s or 60s. Did they go to America?
Yeah, that's right. So they left Hungary shortly after the Hungarian Revolution, the mid 20th century, and they came to America, as you say. And I do think you're totally right. He developed some of that mindset from being, the son born on American soil of immigrants, and then maybe having a certain view and certain expectations that they put on him.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think they pushed him to have maybe the things they couldn't have had themselves? Or did he feel maybe incensed at their lack of progress that they had as younger people, and just out to determinedly prove that more is possible? Did it come from him or from them, or a bit of both?
It was a bit of both for sure. His parents' story is so interesting. As I mentioned, leaving Hungary when they did, having to flee across borders. They had to leave behind their infant daughter, Zoltan's sister, who was born in Hungary. She was too young to be transported across borders. The people smugglers, the people who would take out dissidents and bring them to the United States, they wouldn't transport infants because it was just too dangerous. Too many things could go wrong. You couldn't be sure that they would be quiet all the time, things like that. So they made this very, very difficult, impossible decision to leave behind their infant daughter rather than bring her with them. Now, they thought that they would be reunited with her a lot sooner than they ended up being. They thought it might be only a few months or very, very quick that they were able to reunite with their daughter. It ended up being 3 years. So Gaby, Zoltan's sister, was looked after by her grandparents for a couple of years, eventually was reunited with her parents in the States. But she, and I interviewed her for the book, and she has such an interesting and fascinating story and mindset herself, but she never forgave her parents, in her own words, for that original sin, if you like, that ambition that they had to build a better material life for themselves. Now, they weren't consciously abandoning their daughter in any way. They thought that, they would be reunited with her very quickly, but they did make the decision to go on themselves. And Gaby, I guess, was never able to forgive them for the idea that they wouldn't just stay with her, even in a communist country, even in very difficult life circumstances, that love would have been more to them than their material ambitions, right? And so
If
it's
you look sorry, if you look at 1950s parenting, now I'm not excusing what they did, but I am explaining it in the context of the time. Parents, like children's psychology and attachment theory wasn't really there yet. And there was very much, I think, I know from seeing or hearing about how our parents were raised in the 50s, there was the whole like put the baby in a buggy and leave it outside for 3 hours for fresh air and then bring it in and feed it. And if it's crying, sure, that's good for its lungs. That's just exercising its lungs. And don't hold the baby too much because you'll hurt its back. It needs to be lying down flat on a mattress. And we now know that's all the opposite of what babies need. They need physical attachment to their caregiver in order to bond and create all the right neurological pathways in their brain, especially in infancy. But back then, maybe they just thought she won't remember because she's so young and she'll be well cared for by the grandparents. And they mightn't have just thought it would affect her at all. Whereas nowadays we would realize it would make a big toll on her psyche and she would be traumatized by that event.
for sure. And like you say, it is so interesting because I think, people might fall down on one moral side or the other, but I think it is a case where there are two rights almost. I mean, you can't say that Gaby is wrong to have that view of what her parents did, nor can you say, from my point of view, that her parents were wrong to want a better life for their daughter and for themselves, But Zoltan definitely inherited that mindset from his parents of pushing across borders, of pushing boundaries, of ambition, for sure. And they put a lot on him, no doubt about that. I interviewed his mother as well. And Zoltan would say himself, he was put under a lot of pressure from a young age as his father's son, if you like, his father being a wrestler in school back in Hungary and having to give up that ambition. And so then putting his sporting ambitions onto his son. Zoltan was competing in swim meets from 5 years of age and ended up being a national champion and things like that. But he was forced, if you like, into this very competitive, very high stakes life at a young age because his parents were putting their ambitions and their views for, how they and he should accomplish in the new world, if you like. They were putting all that on him. So that
That's
definitely
very of that generation. You always want your kids to do better than how you did. And it was very much like, if we have the money and resources to let him achieve all this potential, let's make him do it so he doesn't waste his talent.
yeah.
Is Zoltan like that as a father now? Because I know he has children of his own.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and it's interesting how things go back and forth between the generations. I would say as well, there was definitely a certain gendered mindset. I mean, Gaby, was a very competitive swimmer and so on, but like she had said to me, say Zoltan would have been considered to take over his father's business and so on. She would never have been considered for that, at least in her mind. So there's definitely different views in terms of how sons and daughters were pushed as well. But Zoltan today really takes the opposite attitude to his parents. He thinks that his kids really should live their own lives and not be a vassal for his ambitions, and they should have their own ambitions. They should live their own lives. But he doesn't put pressure on them. He just wants them to be happy. He wants them to discover themselves, what's important to them. But I think, his view of technology and our moment in history in terms of technology and where the future will be also comes into that. 'Cause he sort of has this attitude that, oh well, I won't save for my kids' college because in a few years they'll just be able to have a chip in their brain and they can have whatever knowledge they want, and that we'll be uploading knowledge to our minds so we won't have to study. So
Wow.
he sort of thinks about these things. Now, I know he is saving for his kids' college. His wife would kill him if he didn't. But he does have this attitude that, both because I think he wants to be different in terms of his attitude to his kids than his parents were with him. He wants, psychologically to be different, but he also thinks this is a different moment in history where, through new technologies, the next generations will have different sorts of lifestyles than maybe were required in the past.
That's so interesting. especially about the children in college thing, because I have a couple of teenagers, and in the next couple of years we'll be looking at third level. And I even see the difference between obviously my college days, which were pre-Google, pre-internet, pre-email even. And we submitted our essays. We just about had a word processor at home that I would type a thing in on a floppy disk and then bring it somewhere and have it printed out. And that would be my handed in essay, whereas now it's all uploaded into portals and everything. So we probably have less need to store so much in our brains now because we can access it at our fingertips. So I wonder what the future of exams and education will be. And as homeschoolers, where our children are very much autonomous learning, they follow project-based learning. So at the moment, my daughter is racking up probably 3 hours a day playing piano because that's her interest at the moment. And she's reading sheet music because of the app she's using. So that's without any input from me, and my sons are able to learn whatever they want. It's at their fingertips. One is doing 3D animation. The other one is doing, I don't know, graphic design and all these different things that they mightn't have been able to access till third level, normally, but it's now all here at their fingertips. So I do wonder what the future of education holds. And I know AI is changing the workplace. As you said already, we have people being replaced with bots. If you have a question about a product you've bought or a service you've paid for, you can go online and chat with the bot and have all your questions answered. Just the other day, I bought some tickets for Barry for a show and he actually didn't want to go. So I refunded them with a bot in 5 minutes. And before we would have had to maybe make a phone call or write an email. And now a bot sorts it out for you really quickly. So I do see, maybe it's not a good thing because some people would have loved those jobs that the bots are now doing. But then again, maybe it frees people up from these tedious, mindless tasks, and they can actually go and do something maybe more productive or creative or more fun with their time. So there is maybe a place for these advances.
I think it can definitely go both ways. There's no doubt that jobs will change. But I think if you look at the history of new technology, every new technology ends up creating more jobs than it destroys because we do new things. Human input will always be required. And it's about how we make these things useful to us rather than allowing our lives to be controlled by them, if you like. And so I think, jobs will change, but we can also think of these things as tools. I can't imagine doing my job before Google. I know people did be writers before Google, but for the way I work and real-time information and so on, I find it very hard to imagine not having that tool to check a fact instantly,
Yeah.
And I think you can think of things like ChatGPT in the same way. We can use them, but it doesn't mean that human input won't be required. It doesn't mean there won't be writers in the future. It just means there'll be new and different kinds of writing and hopefully more exciting kinds of artwork that we haven't even imagined right now.
Yeah, the world of art has certainly changed. And I don't believe any video or picture I see online anymore, especially with the deep fakes and all the AI generated videos that are coming up on my feed. So we've only a few minutes left, Ben, for our interview, and I could talk to you all day about the future of AI and technology, and I really feel it's creeping up on me. I certainly think we have outsourced a lot. I've outsourced a lot to my Alexa of my working brain because my working memory is pretty much defunct at this stage of my life and my exhaustion levels. But where do you think things are going, say, in the next 20 to 50 years, in hopefully my lifetime? What might we see coming in? Because I couldn't see video phones ever taking off back in the 90s when I first heard about them, and now they're just normal. So what's on the horizon for us to look forward to if we're so lucky?
In terms of where we could go, I don't, even though I've written 2 books about it, I don't claim to be an expert on the technology. Where could we be in 50 years? I can tell you what Zoltan thinks. He thinks in 50 years that we could be living forever. I took part in a panel in 2019 at an event in Barcelona where we discussed the possibility that there was an expert on the panel who thought that the person who will live forever has already been born. So
Wow.
that it will happen, potentially
What
within our
way?
lifetimes.
As in, we'll download the functions of their brain and that will somehow exist on a chip, or that we will get their physical body to somehow exist forever.
So there's different ways it could happen, I guess. And again, I talk about these in the book. And it goes to what you had asked about in terms of where the technology could be in the next 50 years. So what are the different ways? Yes, you could potentially have your mind uploaded into a computer and placed on a chip. That seems to be unlikely. The human mind is so infinitely complex. I think we're only just beginning to understand the nature of its complexity, even if you consider the complexities of a semiconductor. The human mind is infinitely more complex, and we're just beginning to understand. So like the nature of consciousness, getting that onto a floppy disk, I think is still a while away. But genetics is another route, anti-aging therapies. So there has been quite a lot of groundbreaking research into just, I guess, slowing or reversing the aging process. One aspect of transhumanism is that it considers aging itself to be a disease and potentially curable. So, of course, if there was an option for us all maybe to turn the corner back to our early 20s at some point, I imagine there would be a demand for that kind of technology.
Not for me. No thanks. I'd say early 30s, not early 20s. I didn't know enough about life. But I
Are,
know to relive your 20s
right.
again. Yeah, make different
Are,
choices, maybe.
choose
Yeah.
choose choose your decade, I guess. There's a very
Yeah.
interesting novel series, young adult novel series called Arc of a Scythe, where people, they keep their same mindset, but they turn the corner, quote unquote, and go back to an earlier biological age, if you like, but they still have the same uh mind. So it's interesting. Could we
Ah,
could we achieve that? I wouldn't rule it out. I don't know about 50 years, maybe 100 years. I think it's interesting to think about where we'll be in terms of human life, maybe expanding onto other planets. Obviously, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and all the rest want us to establish colonies on the moon and on Mars. Um, so I'm so excited about the next 50 years and what the options could be. I can't tell you what they will be, but I know there are so many things that could happen that are
yeah.
exciting.
When you think of how far we've come in the last 50 years, so much could be possible we can't even dream of yet. Just today, I had a fantastic conversation with a neighbor who is 96, born in 1927. Is that right, maths? Around that age anyway. She's definitely 96, and she was telling me about her childhood in the 30s before the war, and I assumed she was talking about World War II. And she has perfect memory, perfect recall. She knows everybody's name, dog's name on the road. She's an amazing bright mind. And I was just thinking, how long has she got left? We need to preserve her stories. If we could download her thoughts, it would be fascinating. And me and her were talking today about um, just the advances that she has seen. Her house, she lived in Dublin, in the city when she was younger, and they had no bathroom in the house. She said they had to bring a galvanized bath in and fill it with boiled water from pots. And now we've got it on tap. Even those simple things we take for granted are new for some people in their lifetime. So what are we going to see? It's really fascinating.
Yeah, 100%. And obviously, even today, in many parts of the world, the idea of indoor hot water is a privilege, and something that isn't available. So, humanity is also at different points on the development spectrum. There's no doubt about that. But I
That's
am,
Sorry, I was just going to say that's where I think we need to put our efforts, is to bringing everyone up to a comfortable level of living before we then go and try and live on Mars. I would rather see money and efforts being put into humanitarian issues, maybe. But I know
well,
there will always be people dreaming big, spending their billions on their playthings and their rockets and their whatever else they have.
it's such an interesting question. I mean, it's certainly a fundamental moral question, but I think it's also the case that looking at things like the moon landing and so on, the technologies that NASA developed to get people to the moon, how they then became applied in human life, kind of elevated people in a way that
Yeah.
was never considered by people who just wanted to take us to the moon necessarily, so it's kind of hopefully the case, if it works the right way, that, you know, our highest ambitions also help to lift everybody up. I think that would be the ideal. It doesn't always happen, for sure.
The ideal. And it's definitely, I think, the creative's job to keep reminding us of our human side and keep those millionaires and billionaires' feet on the ground as well. And I presume your book does that. I'm sure you're showing the personal side to all his antics. Um, I'm really looking forward to reading the book. What's the name of it again, so people can look out for it?
Yeah, so it's called Transhuman Citizen, Zoltan Istvan's Hunt for Immortality. Um, so
And
yeah,
we
so
will link it in the show notes below. And you're launching it. Do you want to tell us a little about the book launch? I will be there. I can't wait.
yeah, can't wait to see you. So it's on June 15th in Bray, in Marino School in Bray. So we're looking forward to the launch, and yeah, I think it's going to be exciting. It does, as you say, present that human side and that human view that's always been interesting to me. You know, it's funny what we choose to teach our kids and how we choose to run societies, if you like. You know, for 10, 20, 30 years, we'd all been told about STEM and everybody needs to learn to code and maths and blah, blah, blah. And as it turns out, those are the most redundant skills in a world with AI, you know,
Wow,
on one level, because
good. I never got on that train.
right. So, you know, I read somebody saying that verbal skills, Peter Thiel actually saying that verbal skills were going to be, you know, more important maybe than we thought they would be. So, yeah, I like I said, I'm not a scientist. I'm not an expert on the technology. I'm just interested in it, and I'm interested in how it affects humanity and the philosophical story and the human stories behind it. So that's what the book's about, and yeah, I hope everybody enjoys it.
Thank you. And where can people follow you and your work? Do you have a website or a social media you'd like them to check you out on?
Yeah, for sure. You can go to benmurnane.com, and I'm on Twitter and different places. If you Google me, you'll find me. In my day job, I'm the managing editor of the Global Intelligence Letter. If you go to globalintelligenceletter.com, you can sign up for that as well.
Thank you very much. And we will link all those in the show notes below. And before we finish, I've got some quick fire questions to ask you that I'm asking all my guests, if you don't mind answering. Was was there a book or movie that made a big impression on you, maybe in your childhood?
Yeah, for sure. Well, the book that had the biggest impact on me as a kid was Jurassic Park. Just
Loved it too. I read it a million times. It's a fantastic book.
it's such a good book. I remember going to the movies. I think I was too young to actually, you know, legally go, but I still went. Your parents and Alva and I think yourself, we were all that was the first time I saw Jurassic Park. So um
It's good, but the book is so brilliant, and it describes that idea of taking technology and, you know, making things last. It's the same kind of theme as what you're writing about now.
for sure, I think it speaks to a lot of the themes that are in my own work today, the idea of the place of technology in human life, what's ethical and what's not in terms of how we use technology, um, human history and the history of the planet, but also the future of the planet and how those things might be intertwined. Yeah, there's so many ideas in that Michael Crichton book that I've taken to heart.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. It reminds me, I must look for his other books. That's the only one of his. Oh, and I read The Lost World. Did he write that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I read that, but I must look for his other works because I did enjoy him. Okay, next one. What's your desert island meal? And there's no judgment here on this side if it's an unhealthy meal. I pick pizza for mine every time. So what's yours?
It's probably a Chinese takeaway, I'd have to say. You know, it'd be a prawn fried rice or something, but I probably couldn't get that on a desert island. But
Well, let's imagine it's like a technological advance where you just imagine something and it appears in a box. Prawn fried rice and what to drink or what else with it?
prawn fried rice and Jameson whiskey.
Nice. Very nice. Okay, do you have a motto for life?
Do I have a motto for life? Uh, yes. I think that being productive for me, as we talked about earlier, is probably the thing that has brought me the most happiness. So I would say that my motto is be productive. It's, not the most inspiring motto really, but that's how I try to live my life. It's just, what am I doing today? What am I producing today? How am I adding to the value of things in the world today? So be productive.
That's lovely. I love that. And I see you live by that. And it's what keeps you fired up. And you do need that inner motivation as a writer, because I'm sure there's days where you could just slack off. But if you know that that's where you get your joy, you're going to keep going back and just making more great stuff. That's brilliant. Final question. What's your idea of perfect happiness?
I could say working, but Sandra, my wife, would probably kill me. So I know that she feels quite legitimately that I spend far too much time with the laptop in front of me and, not enough time doing things together. That is undoubtedly true of my life. So I would say, yeah, for sure, if I reach that flow stage of work where I'm accomplishing things and just sort of forget about time, that to me is certainly a very happy moment. But also, of course, spending time with loved ones and going on adventures is certainly a big part of my life. It's a part of my job. I'm just back from the Dominican Republic. It was my first time there. I'm lucky that I get to do things like that as part of my job. So yeah, I'm lucky that I've been able to accomplish in my life. I guess I've been able to find joy in my work, and that wasn't always the case. And it was a little maybe bit of a shift in mindset. I kind of used to think of my day job and my projects that I did on my own, my passion projects, as a little bit separate. I was lucky enough to be able to, maybe move my career a little bit more towards things that were more important to me and, incorporate those things in. So I just was lucky in terms of that. So working is definitely my idea of perfect happiness if the work is the right kind of work.
That's brilliant. And I'm always amazed how people like yourself who are absolutely dedicated to making things happen and working so hard describe themselves as lucky. I really believe we make our own luck, and it is through your great hard work and dedication that you have got all these opportunities and continue to grow as an author and a writer. I'm delighted to be related to you and to have spoken to you today. It's been really, really lovely.
Thanks so much, Niamh. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for coming on, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at the book launch. And everyone, please check out the show notes below to follow Ben and read more of his amazing stuff.
Thanks so much, Niamh. See you soon.
Take care. Thank you. Okay, so today I'm joined with Pockets. I'll start again. So can you tell us then about Zoltan and how he comes into the whole thing?
Yeah, sure.
So I hear the dog, they're throwing a ball for the dog right up above me, so I have to scream at them. Sorry about that. The perils of working from home, eh? Thanks for tuning in. I learned so much from Ben in this interview. I'd love to hear your opinions on AI if you'd like to continue the conversation on socials. And what do you think of transhumanism? Is it a pipe dream or the way of the future? Check the links below to follow Ben's work and the books we mentioned. In episode 5, I speak to singer Lisa Kelly of Riverdance and Celtic Woman about juggling a touring schedule with 3 small children, settling in America, my past dreams of becoming a West End musical star, and so much more. Let's spread the joy by sharing this podcast. Give me a 5-star rating, and if you got this far, you might want to sign up for my Inner Circle email at the link below.